Oh, well, hello there. Welcome back to Cultural Anthropology, Week 2 Pandemic Version. I want to touch briefly on last week's film, Nanook of the North, before we get started today with culture. First of all, Nanook of the North is considered to be the first documentary ever made, or at least more appropriately, the first feature-length documentary ever made. It is an amazing film that is one of my favorites. And it talks about because it's not considered what used to be considered talkies. That's what modern movies are talkies. Old movies, they didn't have what was called sync sound, and so they were silent films. And that's what Nanook of the North was. Sometimes, you had in the background, you would have a text that would tell you about, give you context for what you're seeing. Even like the soundtrack that was playing in the background, the music, each theater that this movie was shown would have someone on the side of the theater that was actually playing the music while the movie was being played. So it was a live show in a very real sense. So one of the things that this film did was to sort of really promote this idea of going out and experiencing culture, of exposing people to different cultures that they might know about or they might have heard about, but probably didn't really have any actual experience. So it started this new fad for filmmakers to go out and create really interesting documentary style films, and helped sort of push filmmakers and researchers to work together. Flattery, who made this film, actually made this film twice. The first time, in an accident, all of his footage went up in fire. And it was a real tragedy. And he had filmed, I think, over the course of like 2 years, and then had to come back to the States, and then he went back and reshot everything. And he had a different way of doing it the second time. We will never be able to know what the first amount of footage that he got, what it would have been like. But when you redo something, things are oftentimes different. And what he had decided to do was to take a look at this community, at an individual, and follow what they did, find out what their lives were actually like. And I thought it did a great job of doing that. Now, there's a little bit of controversy with the film, and we have to put it into context. So what the film does is it, describes this man and his family and what their daily life is like, and exploring the environment that they live in, and sort of the ordeals that they have to do. And it's a funny film. There's lots of interesting stuff. There's some drama to it. There's some excitement to it. However, one of the things that happens with filmmakers is that sometimes we have to prepare. And that's kind of what Flattery did. He was like, okay, I need to show this stuff, but how am I going to do it? His main guy, Nanook, come to find out, was a bachelor. Okay, he didn't have a family. The family that he had in the film wasn't his. And that becomes, there's an issue there, right? There's an element of dishonesty. But we have to consider at the same time whether or not what was displayed on film isn't much closer to reality had there been an actual full-on family unit, or was it more made up, right? And I think what Flattery did is he kept the intent of what he was trying to portray as to be true. His intent was to show what this culture was like, what a family unit would look like, what their daily struggles were, and he did that. He did a very good job of it. He left a few things out. One of the things that you might have seen, like when him or his community were hunting, they were hunting with spears and stuff like that. They had long had the rifle, but the rifle doesn't show traditional practices, and that's what Flattery was more interested in, was showing sort of the traditional ideas of this culture. So, and that's another complication. While rifles had been incorporated to the communities and hunting with them was a very common practice at that time, he wanted to show what these folks did before the rifles came. So that was another issue with the film. So while overall I think what Flattery did and what he contributed to the documentary world, the anthropological world, was pretty outstanding. He set a pretty good bar for what a lot of people would want to try and accomplish. We also have to take into account the fact that there are downsides. There are complications. Flattery did what he thought was right. Right now, if we were to remake that film, there would be ethical challenges to try and do it exactly like how he did it. But at the time, that was seen as ethically acceptable. So, yeah, good film. I think it does a lot, but it's also got its complications. So, with that being said, I think we'll go ahead and move on to the body of this week's set of lectures. We're going to be talking about culture. What is culture? Culture is a system of knowledge, belief, patterns of behavior, artifacts, institutions, and these things are created, learned, shared, contested, all by people. Okay, cultures have a shared set of norms, values, symbols, and mental maps as sort of the four main things that we're going to be discussing. But it also includes material objects and systems of power. And these ideas of systems of power, which we will be discussing throughout the semester, are things like politics, economics, religion, education, media. All of these things can have an impact on culture and how we drink it in and soak it in. This is how the world is perceived. Okay, these different aspects. It's how it is shaped. It's how we reinforce certain ideas, and it's how we negotiate new ideas. Okay, so we have all these different things, these systems of power. We have how culture is constructed, and then it all comes down to its general effect on us, how we perceive the world, and how it changes and adapts to us. It can be shaped by any size group of people, large or small, and can have very little diversity depending on the community, or it can have a very wide range of diversity like we have in the United States, all based on religion or sexual orientation or gender or race, ethnicity, class. All of these things can have an impact within a community. There are also communities out there that are very sort of homeostatic. There's not a lot of change to it. There's, whatever change there is, it's very slow moving. Where, say in the United States, change is constantly taking place because people are constantly changing, and that structure of power is oftentimes in flux. So culture is basically how we perceive the world. And it's what we come to think of as normal. Okay, normal is what we do on a regular basis. It's the clothes that you wear, it's the friends that you have, the language that you speak, the daily activities that you engage in are all aspects of culture. So how do we understand what creating culture is? Okay, how do we create culture? Or how do we, become a part of that culture? Well, there's this process called enculturation, which is basically you absorbing culture that you are being exposed to. This can happen in a lot of different ways. First of all, as a child, you're going to be introduced to your culture through your parents. And so their lives, how they view the world, are going to be imprinted on you at a very early age. Your first ability to use language will most likely come from your parents and or siblings. So that's a huge introduction into culture. Then there are schools, right? You start going to school at an early age. Schools and education have a massive impact on your world perception. Not only because of the people that you're going to meet there, but that's where you get the broader scope of the world around you, is through that education. If you look at religion, basically does the same thing that education does. It's a different type of education. So you are indoctrinated into a set of beliefs, a pattern of behavior, much like education, much like family. And it can have a major impact in your life. Your friends. Your friends have a huge impact on your development within a culture. They are the first ones that are outside of your immediate family to introduce you to and expose you to the rest of the world. School and religion will, help to sort of put the foundation of what's going on there, but you're not going to experience it without your friends. And they're going to have different experiences, and they're going to share those experiences, and you're going to get, again, more perspective of what's going on. So friends can have a massive impact. And then also media. And media has varying points of importance. What it comes down to is that, if we consider communities like, and let's take the United States, media is massive. Media is everywhere, right? It's the internet. It is radio, TV, billboards, magazines, books. It's where that stuff is located. I mean, there's schools and where you can get that, and just going downtown and seeing advertisements, or anywhere you go, you're exposed to media. Now, this changes over time. If we go back, even just say, 80 years or 100 years, and we look at how books were distributed, or how radio first came about, and then eventually television, and we look at how media has changed greatly within our own community, we can see how much of an impact it's actually had. And it all comes down to the quantity and the type of exposure. So looking at how things have changed, if we look at, let's say, if we go to a community that doesn't get exposed to a lot of media, that doesn't have internet and movies and TV, blaring at them all the time, there's a good chance that that culture, that community is going to be pretty stable as far as its identity. There's a good chance that it's going to be fairly static. And that's because when you have fewer influences coming in, there are fewer things to create change. And in the United States, we are bombarded with all these different stimuli that can change our patterns of behavior. Should I drink Coke? Should I drink Pepsi? Right? So we have to take into account how important media is in creating and changing and adapting our culture, because it is absolutely huge on how we do it and how we gain information. If we think about historically, what was the main way that a lot of folks around the country got their news? Well, it used to be journalism through newspapers. How many people actually get the newspaper anymore? I doubt many of you actually do get the newspaper or even read the newspaper. And that's because we have different ways of accessing that same information, right? The newspaper is one mode of media that is disappearing. And there are some very serious questions that we have to deal with when it comes to newspapers and what they do as far as journalism is concerned. So, that's how people used to get their knowledge. And now we've got all this other stuff, and it's massive, right? There's so much out there. So, so that's part of how we understand how culture is created and changed. Culture is defined, right? One of the things that we look at in culture is it defines what is right and wrong, what is considered to be lawful and unlawful. And here's the thing, sometimes those two groups don't necessarily match. You might have conflicts within what we consider to be right and wrong and what is considered to be lawful and unlawful. So what I would like you to do right now is we're going to do a quick exercise. And I think how I'm going to try and set this up is to do a discussion group. And basically what I'd like you to do is just come up with one answer each to these two questions, and then post them, and then respond to like one other person and their ideas. And that's try and make sure that everyone gets a response. Again, this is the first time I've ever done this kind of stuff, so it should work. It should work. You guys will find out. So what I want you to do is I want you to define something that could be lawful and yet morally wrong. And then I want you to think of something that is unlawful yet morally right. Okay, so one idea that could be used would be what could be unlawful yet morally right. Well, I might say weed, right? Marijuana. It's throughout the country. It's still considered federally illegal, but many states have decided to change their approach to weed and to the actual issues with weed versus what the perceived issues are. So that could be something that could be unlawful yet morally right. So what I want you to do is take a few minutes, think about this, and then go into the discussion board that I'm going to post up, and then just talk about, something that you think either of these questions could be. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to stop here, and then we'll continue with culture in another minute after you fill out the discussion. Okay, we'll see you in a moment.